Hey everybody, you're watching 5 Minute Web Dev, and this is another episode in our series, 5 Minute JavaScript. Today's topic is event delegation. Event delegation is a strategy that we can use to optimize the performance of our web apps when responding to user events. Let's say you have an unordered list, and you want to do something when a user clicks on a list item. Now, the most obvious thing to do is to grab your list item elements somehow, and then loop through them and attach an event listener or an event handler to each one. In this case, you'd be listening for the click event. This is completely viable and it will work. Here, I use some vanilla JavaScript to grab every element with the class name child, and I use the from array method in order to create a real array so that I can use the for each array method. I do this because get elements by class name doesn't return me an actual array, but it returns an array-like object called an HTML collection. But anyway, this way of doing this will work, and each list item will log out their inner HTML as we can see here. I click and it logs it out. Now, to achieve the same thing with event delegation, you would simply add one event listener to the list item's parent, in this case, the unordered list element, and handle the event there. This is possible because when an event is triggered, you get access to all kinds of info about that event in the event object, including what the actual element was that triggered the event. This element is called the target, and in this example, though the listener is attached to the unordered list element, the target would come back as the actual list item that was clicked. Now, something to remember, when you use event delegation, you likely want to use some sort of conditional, like I do here, to check that the target is the element that you actually mean to target. That way, the parent or any other elements within it don't fire off the event if you don't want them to. In this case, I make sure that the target has the class name child on it. So the thing that I clicked, I make sure it has the class child. Now I'll go over and I'll refresh the page, and you'll see that we have the same behavior as with our other method. I click and it logs out what we want it to log out. Now, event delegation works because of something called event propagation or event bubbling. For example, when we click a list item here, that click event travels up to the unordered list element and triggers the event handler that I've placed there. In other words, events bubble up the DOM. When a DOM element is clicked, for example, that event travels up each level of the DOM and triggers any handlers listening for that event, all the way up to the document level. So I've uncommented our code that adds event listeners to each of the list items, and this is going to help us see event bubbling very clearly. If I refresh the page and begin clicking, each click is going to fire off two handlers, the child handler and the parent handler, and you can see that being logged out here. This is event bubbling in action. Now, just for your information, not all events are bubbled, but as a rule, they are. Those ones that aren't are the exception. So, which should you prefer? Event delegation or just adding listeners to every element you want to listen for events on? A simple answer. If you have quite a few elements that you want to listen to and it makes sense contextually, like they share the same parent, then use event delegation. Event delegation saves memory since only one handler has to be bound instead of many. This benefit obviously grows as a list of items you are listening to grows. If you have a list of 10 elements, you're not going to see much of a performance benefit from using event delegation. But if you have an item of 10 or a list of 10,000 items, you probably will see some sort of performance boost. Now, on the other hand, if the targets you want to listen to are nested very deep down from the parent on which you have attached your listener, you might see a performance drop when an event is triggered because of how far that event has to bubble up before triggering the handler. As with everything, you should make an informed decision, measure, and then optimize what and when you need to. Some other advantages of event delegation appear when you begin to work with elements that are being added dynamically. With event listeners on every element, if those elements get removed, you might run into memory leaks if you forget to remove the event listeners as well. You also run into more complicated logic in setting up those listeners in the first place. With event delegation, you only have to deal with one event listener, and you can safely add and remove elements dynamically without worrying about setting up or tearing down listeners for each one. That's event delegation and how you use it in a nutshell. It can be a great way to simplify your code and to help boost performance on your apps when you have lots of listeners that are reacting to user input. Hope that was helpful. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for watching 5-Minute Web Dev. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment letting me know what other topics you'd like me to cover in the future. Thank you so much, and I'll see you guys next time.